friends. Welcome to Candy's Best Life Over 50. She's a hot mess today. But look, I've been working in the kitchen and I have something amazing to share with you. Okay, are you ready to make some homemade bread? Y'all, it's the best white bread recipe I've ever tried, and I've tried a lot, let me tell you. But the one thing that I like to use is a bread maker. I just don't bake the bread in it. I only use it to make the dough. It just makes my life so much easier. So I'll tell you the ingredients next. Okay, here's the ingredient list to make the best bread on the planet. You're gonna need 4 cups of flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar or 2 tablespoons of honey, that's your choice, 3 tablespoons of the oil of your choice. I use olive oil, you use what you want, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of dry active yeast, and 1.5 cups of warm water. That's it. Go grab those ingredients and let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when I'm baking anything that needs to rise is I want to make sure that my yeast is still good. I store my yeast both in the fridge and the freezer because I'm an overkill kind of person. That's me. So I like to make sure my yeast is good and it can be activated rather than throw everything into my loaf pan and waste all the ingredients. If I'm only gonna waste something, I just want it to be some bad yeast, right? So I take a glass container, whether it's a measuring cup, a little container like this, whatever you want, and I put the 1.5 cups of hot water in there and I add the yeast and 1 of the 2 tablespoons of either sugar or honey to that and let it activate. Now, as far as the temperature of your water, I turn my tap on to hot and I let it get hot. I don't let it get so hot that it's going to burn my finger. If I can stick my finger in it and it's hot, that's the good temperature. If it's too hot, obviously you don't want to put yeast in there because you're going to kill it. So that's a little tip about the water. But once you stir that all together, you're going to set it on the counter. The water's going to help activate the yeast and the sugar's going to help feed the yeast. So that's going to take a few minutes, maybe 2-3 minutes on the counter. You're going to start seeing some foam, some action in there. That's going to let you know that that yeast has been activated. It's still good. If you don't see anything and it's just a cloudy water, you can't make bread because you need yeast that's been activated. You can't make good bread with dead yeast. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so once you've got your little activated yeast mixture, it has 1.5 cups of hot water, 2 teaspoons of yeast, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. You can pour that into your bread loaf pan for your bread maker. This is what mine looks like. I have the paddle in it, but I'm not going to show you the inside because it's still dirty from the bread I made today. But this is what mine looks like. This is a 2-pound loaf. I don't bake my bread in here because this is too big of a loaf for me and my husband, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you're gonna pour your yeast mixture in here, and then you're gonna add your teaspoon of salt and your 3 tablespoons of oil, the oil of your choice. I use olive oil. And then you're gonna start piling in your flour. Now I put 1 cup in there at a time. I try to make it level so that it's not climbing up the sides. When your mixer starts mixing, the paddle starts moving around, you don't want there to be flour up on the sides that it can't incorporate into the bread dough. So I try to keep it level. It just keeps it all down there together. You know what I'm saying? Once you get your 4 cups of flour in there, you can throw that extra teaspoon of sugar on top, or honey, if that's your choice. And then you can put this little bad Larry into your bread maker and turn on the dough setting and walk away. Now, depending on your dough recipe, mine takes about 1.5 hours. So after the 1.5 hours has gone by, you got the mix, the knead, and the first rise already done by your bread maker. Your bread maker keeps this nice and toasty like a little incubator so that you have the perfect temperature for a good rise for that first time. Now you're gonna take that dough out. And for me, I split that dough into 2 loaves. It's just my husband and I. We don't eat a lot of bread, so it's easier for me to make 2 1-pound loaves than 1 2-pound loaf. That just works best for us. So depending on how many loaves of bread you're making, if you're making just 1 or you're making 2, this next step could change just a smidge. Okay, so I have turned out my dough that rose the first time onto a generously floured surface, but honestly, that depends on how sticky your dough is. There's so many factors in the stickiness of your dough. Maybe you under measured your flour just a smidge and you got a sticky dough. Or maybe it's perfect and you don't need any flour. You're gonna know when you turn it out onto the surface whether you need a little bit of flour or not. I usually flour a great big cutting board that I use to keep floury mess off my counter. It's just a personal preference, but I lightly flour it and I keep a little bit of flour to the sides just in case I need to bring a little bit more in. I will punch it down and I will flatten it out into like a square, and then I'll try to cut it in half. Now, 99% of the time I have one loaf that's bigger than the other because I'm not perfect. I'm just not. So I don't need this bread a lot. All I do is kind of roll it into a log, but I will turn it over a couple of times to kind of incorporate some air into it before I roll it out. And I will just roll it with my hands, not a rolling pin or anything. You're just gonna kind of get like a log shape to either the one big 2-pound loaf or 2 1-pound loaves, whichever you're doing. And I will generously spray a bread loaf pan. This is the kind that I use. I spray mine with olive oil. You just get it non-sticky, whether you use vegetable oil or whatever kind of oil you like to use. I like the spray olive oil. It works great. I don't usually get puddles of oil in the corners, which will cause some little discoloration on the corners of your bread, which is no big deal. We're eating it. But that's what I use to oil my pans. So once you get that nice log shape that will fit in here, I tuck the corners under a little bit so that I have nice ends, but that's purely aesthetics. It doesn't make the bread taste any different. So that's up to you. Now the next step, you're gonna let this rise for another 30 minutes. I use these little things. They kind of look like a shower cap. They have elastic. I get a box of them at Dollar Tree, and there's all different kinds of sizes, but the biggest one fits over my bread loaf pans perfectly. So I will cover these with this. I will spray the center of it just a little bit with some oil to make sure if my bread rises up and touches it, it doesn't stick. That just will keep you from deflating your bread before you bake it. It's just a little tip. But also another tip, my kitchen setup is a little strange. As you can see, my oven is there, my microwave is there. So I preheat my oven now before the second rise because I'm gonna want it to be 400 degrees and it will provide a little bit of heat up to the microwave. Not too much heat, but it will keep it nice and toasty in there. Do you know what I'm saying? And I rise my 2 loaves of bread in the microwave. There's no draft in there that will impede my rise. And it gets a little bit of warmth from the oven. That's just what works best for me. So the second rise takes about 30 minutes. Honestly, there's a lot of factors. If your house is cold, drafty, it could take a little bit longer. You just gotta kind of check it along the way. So what I do is after 30 minutes, I will check the rise. And if you hear that, I'm so sorry, that's my dryer going off. I'll check the rise. So I'll take it out on the microwave and you just kind of push your finger into the dough a little bit. And if it bounces right back without leaving any impression, it may have over-risen a little bit. It's fine. Move on to baking it. You may not get a lot more rise out of it during the baking process, but it's fine and it's going to be delicious. If you push it in there and it partially bounces back, that's your perfect rise. If it doesn't bounce back at all and you now have a thumbprint in your dough or a fingerprint in your dough, that means you need to let it rise maybe another 5 minutes. So that's the rise process. Okay, so now we're gonna go on and bake the bread. I do have 2 loaves here. My house literally smells like a bakery. It smells amazing. I will show you those in just a second, but you're gonna bake them for 35 to 40 minutes at either 400 or 425. I know, like, how am I supposed to follow this recipe, right? Well, my oven is over temperature. So I think it's because the inside of it is kind of small, so it actually gets hotter than what the temperature says. So I typically have to knock my temperature down about 25 degrees to get a proper bake on just about everything I bake in there. If your oven is perfect every time, then bake it at 425, for 35 to 40 minutes. If it's nice and toasty on the top and it looks done, take it out after 35 minutes. But if it looks like it's not going to burn in another 5 minutes, keep it in there for the 40 minutes. It's not going to hurt anything. Some people like their bread a little bit darker on the top too. So the 40 minutes might work perfect for you. Okay, so do you want to see my bread? What I do is I take it out of the oven and I pretty much, with some hot pads obviously, I turn it out onto a cooling rack pretty much immediately. That'll help it cool down really fast, and you won't have any moisture that will happen in there while you've got the hot pan and the cool air. You know, just get it out of that hot pan as fast as you can. So I have 2 loaves here. I have one that looks perfect and one that doesn't look so perfect, and that's 100% typical for things that I make. So here's my first loaf. See how it's got a crease here? When I was folding my dough over, like I said you did before you put it in the pan, I just didn't seal up my edges right. So that's all on me. And it is a little bit fatter on one end and skinnier on the other, but it's still gonna be delicious. But listen, that's a perfectly baked loaf of bread. Here's the bottom. The bottom will get a little bit browner because it's my oven, y'all. It's fine, but it's not burnt at all. That's a nice crisp bottom. So this is one loaf. This is my wonky loaf. I always have one. And this is my perfect little loaf. Nice rise, perfectly shaped, perfectly crisp on the outside. Okay, so I'm gonna let that 100% cool. And this is how I preserve my bread. I still have a partial loaf of bread from the last time I made bread in the refrigerator. So I will typically keep these in the freezer whole. That's what works best for me. So when these are perfectly 100% cooled down, I'm gonna wrap each one in cellophane, and then I'm gonna put each one in a freezer bag and pop them in my freezer. That's how I store my bread. Now, I had a loaf that I just took out of the freezer that I baked over a month ago, and I took it out and sliced it, and it is so good. It doesn't dry out. It's soft. It's so good. So this works for me. My husband and I don't eat a lot of bread, and I don't like to slice it and then put it in the freezer because that will cause it to dry out quicker. So another tip about slicing bread, especially if you've frozen it, is don't let it completely thaw before you slice it. I prefer to have it about half frozen still when I start to cut it because it's firmer. It's not gonna smush on you while you're trying to slice it, and you're gonna be able to get nice even cuts without crushing your loaf of bread. So that's how I do it. It works out great, and the bread is delicious, and it will last a long time in your freezer. Okay, you guys, that's it. It's super easy. If you have a bread maker with a dough recipe, it's even easier. There's no kneading required. It's just a few ingredients that you probably already have on your shelf, and the bread maker does all the hard work for you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that little like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, and you can hit the notification bell to get notified when I upload new content. Have a great day, you guys. Bye.